I want to bring in NBC's Courtney Kube covering the Pentagon. General Wesley Clark is a former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. Andrew Boreen is former senior officer with the DNI and an executive director at Flashpoint. So, Courtney, tell us about your reporting on these threats to the U.S. homeland.
Yeah, so we've learned, according to our colleagues Carol Lee and Monica Alba and I, our sources, telling us that recently Iran sent a message directly to President Donald Trump, warning him that if he were to engage in U.S. military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, that Iran has a number of sleeper cells here in the United States, and they could unleash some sort of a terror attack here domestically. Now, this message came through an intermediary during the G7 meeting in Canada. Chris, you'll recall that President Trump left that meeting early, saying that he needed to come back to D.C. to deal with the ongoing tensions between Israel and Iran. Now, this is not the only threat of the notion that there could be some sort of an attack here in the United States. As you mentioned, there is a lot of concern by defense officials and administration officials about the possibility that Iran could retaliate against U.S. installations in the region. There's not just military bases, but there's also U.S. Navy ships in the region. And remember, this is not just concern about sort of a big Iran attack, meaning the actual regime striking with missiles or drones. There's always the possibility that some of those Iranian proxy networks, which still exist, many have been damaged, but there are some that still exist and have the ability to attack U.S. bases and installations. There's the concern that they also could be unleashed here, Chris. The biggest one of those concerns is that they could try to overwhelm defenses at some of these smaller bases in the area. Chris?
So, Andrew, what is your assessment of the capability of Iranian sleeper cells? Can you tell us a little bit more about who they are and what they could actually do?
Yeah. First off, when we think about Iranian-aligned militia groups, they're largely, for the last 40 years, been supported through the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps and Al-Quds Force. Now, in terms of capabilities, two of the very senior-most Iranian leaders that had been pushing, for instance, tactics, techniques, and materials into some of the networks that were killing U.S. troops in Iraq, with IEDs and some of the more sophisticated penetration charges have been taken off the battle space in the last 72 hours. So in some ways, I think that there is that in addition to the IDF operation that targeted Hezbollah leadership with the pagers, with a number of strikes against the Houthis in Yemen by the U.S. I think they are degraded. There's no question. And we're seeing it through Hezbollah even announcing that it would not be actively participating against Israel after Israel started its air campaign last week.
So when these cities ramp up their...
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, so as individual cities here at home ramp up their protection, do you see it as more out of an abundance of caution?
Look, even before the State Department had issued a heightened terror awareness alert, or DHS had announced this, or for instance, Los Angeles Police Department had announced that they were getting on a stronger footing for anti-terrorism. I think that is, one, wise, and two, I think my biggest fear is that one of these singletons or lone wolves or even a small cell that has been had a persistent presence here in the United States or in any other area outside of the Middle East would self-activate based on kind of a loss of traditional command and control as the Iranian regime and IRGC and Quds Force leadership is taken off the battlefield. And that I think, is a real concern.
So, General, what do you make of that? I want to look at the big picture and in country as well as out of country. But what about that idea of, for lack of a better term, what we used to call a lone wolf or self-activating? What do you see as the threat level there? And what's your level of concern for American forces throughout the region?
Well, here at home, I think there are sleeper cells. I think they could self-activate. I think they could do individual acts of murder against officials if they could identify those officials and get to them. They might go after a sensitive infrastructure like the electricity grid. And you don't have to do it with cyber. You could do it with, let's say, explosives. So that would be one effort that they could make. Is it going to be significant? Doubtless. It will be enraging the American people if it happens. It's the best way Iran could ensure a really dramatic strike by the United States that would enable the United States to really go after the regime rather than the nuclear. So I put that as low probability. I say the greatest probability is some of the militia, not Hezbollah, with a few rockets and then ground attacks going after isolated American outposts, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, that area as an indicator of strength, but not a decisive commitment by the regime.
NBC's Keir Simmons is in Erbil, Iraq, where we do have troops stationed, and he joins us now live. How have things changed there over the past 48 hours? Tell us what you are seeing where you are.
Well, it's calm, Chris, and that doesn't necessarily tell you anything. We can see the U.S. base here in Erbil, those bases that were just being mentioned by your contributor. We can see one at that base from here. We're about 2 hours from the Iranian border. It's certainly one of, if not the closest U.S. base to Iran. So if there was going to be a targeting of U.S. Forces, it might happen here. Now, I will tell you just news before I came to you. We're hearing that Qatar has closed its airspace. That is suggesting that in Doha, they are concerned that there might be some kind of a retaliation by the Iranians coming. They have closed their airspace, and it looks like from, these days, of course, we're able to monitor planes in the sky, right? It looks like from those online sites that a number of planes have had to redirect. So they didn't take that decision lightly in that case. The other Gulf states, though, not closing airspace at this stage. So what are the Qataris doing there that the others aren't doing? That's an interesting question. I should just mention, too, we do have now a new statement from President Trump on Truth Social. Anna, Chris, and I'll just, it's long. You've probably read it too, right? And he says, did I hear former President Medvedev from Russia casually throwing around the N-word, brackets nuclear, and saying he and other countries would supply nuclear warheads to Iran, question mark? Did he really say that, or is it just a figment of my imagination? If he did say that, and if confirmed, please let me know immediately. And he goes on. So that's an indication to me of how febrile the atmosphere is becoming. Dmitry Medvedev is not really a spokesperson for the Russian government. He was a prime minister, he was a president, but he was pushed out of office again by President Putin, and he tends to post inflammatory comments that should be read with a dose of salt. Doesn't look like President Trump has done that. It's a difficult. So you asked me about. You began by asking me about the atmosphere here in Kurdistan. It's pretty calm here, but I think not really.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Keir, which generally leads to the question about what, if any, role you see for Russian President Vladimir Putin. I mean, the Kremlin spokesman today said that Russia is ready to help Iran. How does this fit into the overall picture in your mind?
So I think Putin would like to be invoked as a mediator. That's his ideal role. President Trump has not thus far invited him in. I think it's a little early for Russia to begin deploying, let's say, military assets to assist Iran. I think Putin remains focused on Ukraine. What he wants is to have Europe and the United States totally distracted, focus on Iran, let him go after Ukraine. He does have some kind of a relationship with President Trump. We don't know what it is, but it seems that the NATO summit's coming up. We'll see what President Trump says at the summit about Ukraine. But this is clearly Putin trying to have it both ways. He wants to focus on Ukraine. He doesn't want to throw Iran totally under the bus, but he doesn't want a confrontation with President Trump over Iran.
So let's go back to Iran, Andrew. They've been talking big, telling Trump, you started the war, but we will end it. How are Iranian officials, do you imagine, calculating their next move?
Well, I mean, let's be honest. I think right now, Iranian military leadership and political leadership is largely in a defensive crouch. The IDF strikes of the past week now have really been pinpoint specific on targeting leadership and some key nodes in their ability to kind of administer the government. And since General Clark brought up the NATO summit next week, I actually want to bring up something that we haven't been talking about since kind of conventional wisdom since 9/11 is that air power alone can't achieve regime change or can't achieve societal push in a foreign country. And I think General Clark was the NATO Supreme Allied Commander during Allied force, what the U.S. called Noble Anvil. And Noble Anvil was really dedicated by air power to push the Yugoslavian Slobodan Milosevic regime out of its efforts to ethnically cleanse Kosovars, Albanian ethnic Kosovars. And that was the kind of scope. I think currently the White House has made it very clear they are not at war with Iran. The United States is at war with Iran's nuclear program and ability to obtain offensive nuclear capacity. So I do think that there are some interesting analogies. And while it did not directly lead to the fall of the Slobodan Milosevic regime, the following year he lost power. In 2001, he was arrested by the Serbian police, and then we saw him prosecuted in the International Tribunal for war crimes in Yugoslavia. So I think there is a justice cascade that could push this towards more accountability for a regime that has been the largest state sponsor of terrorism since 1979.